It's a pleasure to be here and be with you all to talk about global markets research and basics of exporting. I'm Carmela Mammas, the Director of U.S. Commercial Service New York, which is an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration. My office is in Lower Manhattan, and I cover Long Island as well. We do have an Export Assistance Center at NYIT as well, which will be a future resource following, this program over the coming years. So I have 30 plus years with the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I lead a team of senior international trade specialists, and we help U.S. companies to expand internationally their goods and services that are at least 51% U.S. content to expand through our network of over 75 markets, which are based in the U.S. commercial the commercial section of the American embassies and consulates. So that's who I am. Let's go to the next slide then. So this is the agenda I'm going to go over. I already touched on who we are, but I'll get into that a little bit more. Also, why exports matter, which I'm sure all of you, are aware of that. That's why you're joining this webinar. I'll go over some excellent market research and industry tools, as well as go over some key points on helping U.S. companies determine if they're export ready. Also, there'll be information on an export plan, including a link to how to create one if you haven't done so yet. And then we'll just touch upon different sales channels like agents, distributors, and importers or retailers. I'll go over some of our programs to help U.S. companies find qualified buyers and partners, as well as some of the international trade events. Many take place overseas, but there's some that take place in the U.S. as well. And then I'll just touch upon some legal considerations, the importance of export compliance, and the importance of protecting intellectual property. And then I'll also touch upon preparing your product for export, different trade finance methods, and then some other great contacts in the global ecosystem. So next slide, please.
Carmela, I just have something to ask here.
Sure.
I know the answer, but why are you focusing only on export? It's a question I get all the time.
Yes, I work for the U.S. government's lead export promotion arm, which is the International Trade Administration, U.S. Commercial Service. So we do not help U.S. companies to import. We strictly are an export promotion agency. There's other agencies that focus on importing. Most of the import U.S. agencies focus on, compliance, as well as what are the import duties and the such. So, for example, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is the lead federal agency that has import information. They have import specialists that U.S. companies can call and ask questions, on the product that they're trying to import. And then we always suggest companies, if they're not familiar with how to bring goods into the U.S., that they hire a U.S. Customs House broker. And there's 2 in the area that have lists of qualified U.S. custom brokers, including one at in the JFK airport area, and then there's one in New Jersey as well. So yes, we are the Federal Export Promotion Agency, and our main mission is to help U.S. companies export their goods and services to create more U.S. jobs through exports. We're trying to create more manufacturing here in the U.S. and create value, high value jobs. Export jobs tend to pay more as well. Does anyone have a question about that?
I have now I have two questions. You just, on the first slide, you had FTAs. Does that mean free trade agreements, free to air, or something else?
Free trade agreements. So for new to export companies, those are excellent markets for U.S. companies to look at first, because in many cases, you know, the restrictions, you know, exporting to those countries are less, diminished, you know, reduced, and you know, in many cases, the duties over time, if not, you know, once the free trade agreement is in full force, there's that free trade between the two countries. So that's a really big plus for U.S. companies to be competitive in those markets. So free trade agreements are great to look at for U.S. companies as some first markets, including Canada and Mexico, for example, which those could be great initial markets since they're so close to the U.S. But yes, free trade agreements, very important. So here's a snapshot of all of our offices around the globe. We have about 100 offices in the U.S., like mine in Lower Manhattan, and then the one we're co-located with, at NYIT. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're in over 75 countries in the commercial sections of the American embassies and consulates. Where we don't have an office, like, for example, in Africa, we have many countries where we don't have an office. We do partner with the U.S. State Department. We have partner posts, and they conduct our services to help U.S. companies. But we do have several great offices in Africa, that being said. So we are an excellent resource, as you can see, all over the world. Next slide, please. So these generally are services. We do export counseling at no cost to U.S. companies, from A to Z, from if a company's just starting to export, or if they're having, need help, specifically with one market, understand the regulatory requirements. The market intelligence we have is extremely valuable in that respect, whether it be helping companies, identify the import requirements into that particular market. Let's say it's a medical device. The U.S. company will likely have to register that product in the market before they're able to export there. And then for new to export companies, we can help them do market research with the tools I'm going to present today to help them identify the best markets for their products and services. So that's really important, to be strategic and not necessarily just sell to companies all over the world through their website because it seems like a great lead. It's important for U.S. companies to be just strategic in their exports. Our sweet spot is business matchmaking. We have some great programs to match U.S. companies with potential foreign buyers, partners. Excuse me. It could be one-on-one meetings in the market. So if a company is already traveling, a company representatives already traveling to the UK, for example, and they want to meet with some other potential partners, we can arrange a day of meetings under our Gold Key service with advance notice. We also do the same in virtual meetings, and we also have report formats of potential partners as well. So business matchmaking is our sweet spot. It's, really important because we can help companies navigate all the other issues, but it's important to help them find someone they could sell to. Excuse me.
Carmela, is there, while you're taking a little sip there, are there any particular things that are really that are really good for export that we can highlight here, or no? I mean, what are they looking for mostly? What's some of the best products to export?
Well,
Medical equipment, like you said.
I mean, there's a variety of things. I could speak to New York City specifically, and even Long Island. For example, my team in New York City are focused by industry, and those are the industries that we've identified as the best prospects for New York City companies. So cosmetics is very popular. So someone's assigned to cosmetics, someone's assigned to apparel. We work with a lot of the design fashion companies in New York City. We also work with the fine jewelry. So one individual covers those sectors. Then we have another colleague who covers financial services, which of course is very important to New York City and the entire state of New York. He also covers technologies, all kinds of technologies, from smart cities, to software, to other things.
So intellectual property as well.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call that intellectual property, but those are like financial services could be a software for a bank. So maybe Frankfurt, Germany, the banks in Frankfurt, Germany would be a good. I mean, it's all, I guess you could consider intellectual property, especially, and also there could be trade secrets involved, but these are tangible products that I'm speaking of.
That's what I was driving at. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And then another colleague covers renewable energy. So we, for example, work with some companies in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. He also covers environmental technologies. That sort of thing is what we focus, those are just an element. So it really, I don't have a wide view of the US since I cover New York City and Long Island. So my view is really in our area. There are some, sectors that are important to the administration, including clean tech. But we work with all companies who have an export-ready company and have a product or service that has potential in international markets. So we work with companies individually to help them identify that. So I hope that answers that question. We also provide commercial diplomacy if any companies are having issues with the foreign market. It may be that they're being treated unfairly. Yes, these are all services. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so I think, why export matters. We can just quickly say that more than 70 of the world's purchasing power is outside the US, and many countries, really prefer to have US products, including China. They love American, things made in US, like cosmetics and consumer goods like that, including jewelry. So let's go to the next slide. So market research is really important. As I mentioned earlier, companies really need to be strategic as they're identifying international markets to sell to. And a great place to start is to use the harmonized code. We also refer to it as a Schedule B code in our office. But if a company is exporting a product or would like to export a product, the first thing that they should do is identify what is the harmonized code or Schedule B number for that product. It's a worldwide standard. The first 6 digits are used worldwide, and every company that's exporting that same product around the world should be using the same 6-digit classification code. The US has an additional 4 digits, and so what's important about this code is US companies can do statistics using data compiled by the US Census Department, US Census Bureau, to identify which companies around the globe are importing that specific product from the US. And US companies could even see the trends. Is there an upward trend of imports, or is it declining? So that code is very important for market research purposes. Excuse me. But then it's really important for US companies who do engage in exporting, because the 6-digit code will identify what they're going to pay in duties and taxes in the foreign market. Next slide, please. Excuse me, overnight I caught a cold, so I apologize. Yeah, so this is, I just went over this, but the way the Census Bureau identifies and puts together statistics is that when a company sells over $2,500 for a particular product in their shipment, the Census Bureau will compile that into the statistics. Yeah, so I went over this already, but there's some resources that are included in this presentation where if a US company isn't aware of what their Schedule B code is, they can look it up on a search engine on the Census Bureau's website, and also they will use that code in the customs info database to determine what is their estimated duties and taxes for a particular country that they want to export to. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the tool I mentioned earlier, where a company can do searches in the database for their harmonized code number. Another screenshot of the tool. Next slide, please. So my agency has some really great market research that is completely free and available in all the countries that we have offices. So if you're interested in a particular market, you could go to trade.gov and go into the country page. Excuse me, just give me a minute.
Okay, so trade.gov/ whatever country it is that you're interested in. That's interesting. Okay. So you can get in touch with the office that's in that country. I see. All right.
And we have a country commercial guide. We have market intelligence. It's just a great place for a company to start their market research to see what information is completely free. The information is written by my colleagues in those countries. So it's really, really great information.
Next
slide, please. So this is another great market research tool that could help companies identify additional markets. It's prepared by the Census Bureau. And everyone's gonna receive this presentation so you can click on the live links and do some research on your own. Next slide, please. And this is a new tool that my agency just developed. It is really an excellent database to get started. So the US company will put in all kinds of criteria, and the system will give a list of companies that the US company should be looking at. It's just a really fantastic tool.
Next.
Yes. So this slide has a summary of all these market research tools. And also there's a link, Leslie, to the free trade agreements. So there's lots of great information on that, which countries are free trade agreement countries. Next slide, please. So here are some questions. If a US company is thinking about getting engaged in exporting, here are some questions they should ask themselves. What we look at in my office when working with new to export companies is do they have a product or service that has sold successfully in the US market? That's really important.
sometimes a company is just an export company. So of course, we'll consider that as well. Like an export trading company or an export management company. But I think it's really important for a US company to be successful in the US market before they look at international. Although they may be able to develop a successful e-commerce program. Next slide, please.
Yes, this is what I was interested in talking about too, about the intellectual property protection for your product, because when you get a patent in the US, it doesn't cover you for other countries. So you need to know about this as well. I mean, we can offer help about this. If Carmela, just to fill in here, we have a wonderful resource at the Smithtown Library, Patents and Trademarks Resource Center. There's a gentleman there, William Salas, I can put you in touch with if you have any questions about patent protection. Your US patent only covers your products in the US. So you need to be, you need to have an agreement.
So it's really important to have an export plan. It's the next step after a US company has a business plan, right? Business plan would be, the first step, working with Ronnie and her, Leslie. They could help you do a business plan if you don't have one. But before you engage in international, you need to develop an international export strategy or international marketing plan. And that will include things like, what countries have the best potential for your product or service. You need to look at pricing your product so that you're competitive, as well as making a profit. That's why you have to look at duties and taxes so that you're pricing your product correctly. And then, also do any modifications need to be done in order to make it, meet the requirements of a particular country that you'd like to export to. And of course, every US company needs an export licensing strategy, even if they're selling books. US companies need to make sure they're not selling those books to somebody who's on the bad list. And I'll go into some of these in a little bit. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a sample export plan. And, as you can see, it's probably, similar to some of the financial concerns that you need to consider when you're developing your general business plan.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have to look at non-financial resources, what's going on in the market, your capacity. Do you have the capacity if you start getting a lot of export orders? Do you have the capacity to actually fill those? Because that's really important as well, that come in. Does anyone have any questions before I go to the next slide? Okay, next slide.
Is there what, before you start to export, is there do you have to be in business for a certain amount of time before you can actually do it?
No, I'm not aware of any.
And who checks this plan that you have this? It's like when we do a business plan for a business that wants to get money from a bank, that's what they're using a business plan for. And we know how to tailor the business plan. And we also know what banks, what they favor in terms of, what businesses can do, the capacity, all of that stuff. But is there anyone that checks these plans before it begins, or you just, no?
Well, it is important for banking information. If a US company needs an export working capital guarantee because they don't have the funding to fill a really great order, I'm sure it would be helpful for them to have an export plan.
Okay.
So that when they go into a bank to get working capital, they can show I have a strategic plan, I've identified specific markets. So, but ultimately, this is really important for the company executives to do so that they're strategic in, so that they're strategic on where they're selling to. So the most important thing is US companies need this so that they could be strategic, and identify the markets that have the best potential for them, because that's where they want to put their resources, because then their profits will be maximized.
And what about the
Effectively.
export? What about the banks? What about the, the transfer of funds and all of that? Do you talk about that?
Well, we will get into that a little bit more shortly, but we are co-located with the United States Export-Import Bank's Northeast Regional Office,
Right.
and a trade finance manager at the SBA. So I sit in the same office with these folks.
Mhm.
They get more into the trade finance aspect.
Yes.
So that my expertise is marketing and their expertise is trade finance. So
Right.
they may suggest like these banks are more open.
I just
trade
thought it's
finance.
important to mention because they can't, how else do you transfer the funds? But I know that, but I just thought I would ask the question anyway. All right. Thank you. Do you want me to advance now?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
okay.
Yeah, so again, I can't stress how much it's important for US company to do the market research and target their markets. Yeah, so why don't, for the sake of time, just keep moving, because I think this is just to give you a snapshot of things to consider. So this is where if
Great.
anyone would like to develop a plan, this is some resources where tools you could use to develop an export plan. And there's also a webinar where you can watch and get more detailed information on how to write a good export plan. Next slide, please. So these are the different sales methods I briefly mentioned before. Sometimes companies passively fill orders. Others actually, they may sell through a domestic partner, which actually I just saw happen recently at a conference. One of our clients met another client and they decided to partner because the one company had already an international network. So sometimes that happens. So it's good to look at that as well. And then of course you could use intermediaries, as I mentioned before, an export managed company or export trading company, an export management company. You would basically hire them to represent you through exports. That's how it works. And then exporting directly is really mainly what we help our clients do. We help them through our services find qualified potential partners internationally. So next slide, please. So these are the different sales methods we typically see: a sales rep, agents, distributors, foreign retailers, and direct sales to end users. Most of our clients are small to medium-sized companies. So we don't typically suggest they sell directly to end users in international markets. We typically suggest they find a partner, an agent, distributor, importer that knows how to import the product into the country, knows the rules and regulations. So our small to medium-sized companies, we usually help them find agents, distributors, and importers. In the fashion sector, though, we do help them get introduced to retailers. For example, a fashion designer in the UK, in New York City, we may be able to introduce them to some really great retailers in the UK. Some companies do sell directly to end users, and that does happen, but it's hard for a small company to manage when they do it that way, because you have to think about, for companies who have more industrial products, after sales support, what if there's an issue, what if something needs to be repaired or training's needed. So typically our clients, we help them find an agent, distributor, importer. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this earlier. My agency does have programs to help US companies find pre-qualified partners. I mentioned our market research that's on trade.gov and through our other databases, is completely at no charge. Our counseling is at no charge. But when we do a product, a partner search, we charge a minimal fee based on the service, because we're doing that service specifically for that company. And we have a mandate of cost recovery from Congress, a percentage of cost recovery. So we do have to charge a minimal fee for our services, kind of like the passport office charges fees and things like that. So it's based, small companies pay very minimal fee. So I just wanted to mention that, but these are dedicated services where if, let's say, a US company was going to the UK, they're meeting potential partner, and they're like, while I'm there, I would love to meet other potential partners. So we could do our Gold Key service with advance notice. We'll introduce the US company to our colleague who covers that sector in the UK. And then we will investigate the market, contact potential partners, and evaluate their interest to meet the US company. And if they're interested, we'll arrange meetings. So that US company will fly in. We'll have 4 or 5 meetings for them with potential partners who already express interest in talking to them. That's our Gold Key service. So that's, I just want to mention that these services do have minimal fees based on our cost recovery mandate. Trade events, whether it's trade missions, we also certify domestic shows where we lead international buying delegations. We have international shows where we support as well. So we also engage in a variety of trade events throughout the year. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are key regulatory agencies. Most of our clients are subject to the BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security, because they have dual use items, meaning it can have a domestic or it could have a commercial or military application, but some companies fall under Department of Defense or the State Department. And then obviously everyone is subject to the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. You shouldn't be exporting to countries. We have an embargo unless you have a humanitarian product and you've received a license for it. So there are these regulatory agencies as well. Next slide, please. Here are some of the legal considerations. Export compliance is really important for every company who's thinking about exporting to have an export compliance plan, even if they're not exporting a dual use item or, a high-tech item that has controls. It's important for US companies to ensure they're not exporting to individuals who are not on a list of individuals that they shouldn't be exporting to. And so on trade.gov, we have information on this, and there's a consolidated screening listing. So my suggestion for new to exporters is to go to the consolidated screening list, type in the name of the potential buyer, and make sure that they're not, on a list. Does anyone have any questions on that?
There's so much information here. It's like, whoa, somebody has to really go through all of these things. Do you want me to advance now? Any questions? No? Yes?
Yeah, so that's what I would suggest. Because if you sell to somebody you shouldn't have, and the US government compliance agency comes knocking on your door, you want to say, well, I checked the consolidated screening list and I didn't find their name. Here's my compliance plan. The penalties will be a lot less, right? Most products don't need an export license, but I think it's really important for a US company to have a plan. I wouldn't want this to, you know, be a deterrent for anyone who's thinking about exporting. Most
Right.
products don't need an export license, but U.S. companies they need to go through this process, which shouldn't take that long, and do a self-assessment. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here is a slide on intellectual property. There's the resource I mentioned, which has lots of great information, including the resources that Ronnie mentioned earlier, right on Long Island. This is additional resource. And U.S. companies need to prepare for their product to export. They need to ensure that it meets all the product safety requirements of the foreign market. I mean, it could even be things just like color and the way that they've, you know, written their marketing materials. Our country commercial guides can be very helpful to identify any potential cultural differences. And then as I mentioned, the warranties, companies may need to consider if, you know, they need to offer after sales support or warranties. And then that's where it becomes really important to have a partner in the market to help with that. But the important thing is your products have to be, if you have a product or you're working with companies that have a product, they should consider this. Next slide, please. Here are just some other topics: product adaptation, engineering and redesign, branding, label, and packaging, and all these resources are here that you can click on later. So next slide, please. Again, there are also standards U.S. companies need to be aware of that might be different from the U.S. I'm going through this now with a 3D printer manufacturer based in Brooklyn. There's like a Canadian standard they have to comply with, and a Mexican one, and so they need to comply with these things. And they could actually apply for that New York State export grant I mentioned to help prepare, you know, help them, you know, go through the process of meeting these standards. So next slide, please. Export financing, there's different methods of payment. I mean, the best thing is if a company get paid cash in advance, but they have to have a very innovative product or service to get that, but that would be the ideal thing. Exim Bank has a great program. It's a trade credit insurance program. So if U.S. companies, in order for them to compete with their international competitors, if they offer terms, they might get the business over an international competitor. Exim Bank can offer insurance so that to the U.S. company, so that U.S. company can offer like 30, 60-day terms. And if the buyer defaults, they'll get reimbursed by Exim Bank. So there are tools, federal tools that U.S. companies can think about. And there's of course the standard banking tools like letters of credit. And that's why it's important for U.S. companies to work closely with their banker. Yes. So let's, the person who's handling domestic sales, it's likely a different person handling trade finance at the bank. So get to know the correct person at your bank if you're going to be engaging in international trade. Next slide, please. So here are the key export finance agencies in the federal government. I mentioned earlier, I'm co-located with Exim Bank and SBA in Lower Manhattan. So if anybody would like more information or meet with those contacts, I'm happy to introduce you. Next slide. So here's the information on New York State's export program. Next slide, please. Yeah, all right, so that's it. So sorry, I rushed through a lot of these slides, but I'm happy to answer any questions and stay on as long as you need. But
Got two of them.
all the links are, in the presentation. If you click on some of the links after this presentation, have any questions, want me to walk you through any of the market research databases as you're doing it, I'd be happy to do that individually.